Serious people who have found a secret room or space in their house. How long did you live in the house before you found it, and what was in it? What was the eventual outcome of finding the room? Moved into an 18th-century farmhouse as a little kid and found a small panel door in the back of the large closet in my small room. Turned out to be a small finished room over the eaves that had a small portal window. I spent hours in that room reading and hiding from the world. This sounds like a childhood dream come true. When clearing out my grandma's house, I found a small door in the wall of the basement that led to a tiny room. According to my mother, that's where they hid the family heirlooms when thieving relatives came to town. I was mostly interested in the fact that it was covered in scribbles from my mom and her sisters growing up. Ah, that reminds me of my grandmother. Your other grandparents will be joining us. So I'm putting away the good dishes. I mean, a passive-aggressive slight isn't exactly rude if it's true. Though, right? It was about a year into owning our house. We actually found 2 secret rooms. One was just a room under the stairs that was closed off. Had some toys from the 70s in it. The really crazy one was when we redid the insulation in our attic. One of the workers asked if I knew there was a room up there. I had no idea. So we cut open the drywall and there were stacks on stacks of boxes from the 60s. Like a ton of boxes. And they were all full. So I opened them up expecting some cool stuff. And they were full of freaking PINECONES. One of the bigger bummers of my life. When I was younger, my family would go and collect pine cones and store them in our attic. We would use them for kindling in the winter. In my house there was an upstairs bedroom that was made into a game room for me and my sister. When we were about 12 years old, we realized that a section of the paneling came off and there was a small closet-sized room behind it. We kept it a secret so that when friends came over we would have the ultimate hiding spot for hide and seek. A few years later we were talking to our parents about what we found, and they said that the house was built during the Prohibition era. So they most likely used it as a place to hide alcohol. I went to visit my grandparents a few months after they had moved into a new house out in the country. I got into a bit of horseplay with a cousin and got shoved into a wall. It broke a big hole and we realized there was a large empty space back there. With Grandpa's help we tore the wall down and found a little room full of planting trays and grow lamps. There were a number of books about growing plants and one specifically about growing marijuana. There was no secret way in as far as we could tell. Someone had just walled the entire room off for some reason. In a house a friend was renting. I realized that there was a missing 5 feet between the back wall of the master bedroom and the back wall of the garage. Poking around the garage I found a piece of plywood with concealed hinges. Held shut with 2 nails. Opened it and found a 12 by 5 room with walls covered with foil and a couple of outlets for lamps on the ceiling. My friend converted it into a walk-in closet. Back in college some friends and I rented an old mansion that had been built in the early 1920s from an elderly lady. The place was falling apart. But it was huge and rent was dirt cheap. About 2 years into living there I went to the basement to do some laundry and momentarily lost my balance. Reaching out to steady myself using one of the wall panels. It flexed more than I expected. And after some inspection I found that it was removable. Behind it was a small, mostly empty, very dirty concrete room about 100 square feet. I say mostly empty because right in the middle there was a hole the size of a well that had been previously bricked up. It must have been old because the bricks had eroded at some point and exposed some of the hole. Maybe a 2 feet diameter circle out of the full 5 feet. After calling my friends down to look at it I got the courage to creep a little closer and peer down into it. There was another room roughly the same size but deep. Maybe 15 feet down. And mostly dirt. We shined a flashlight down into it and I could swear there was a teddy bear at the bottom. Unfortunately, despite plenty bargaining, none of us were ever able to work up the courage, liquid or regular, to tie a rope and climb down for a closer look. Especially after we noticed that the bricks which I thought had fallen in were all accounted for. Scattered around the hole as if something had broken out. At the risk of my account being discovered by my Redditor friends. This was in Pittsburgh. We did a little research and think the sub-basement may have been related to Prohibition. But honestly, I'm just willing to accept that explanation in order to avoid lifelong nightmares. Of all the stories I've seen so far, yours gave me the creeps. Thankfully. It's almost dawn here already. Shouldn't have read that in the middle of the night. Not necessarily secret. But my old house was a duplex. There was a hobbit-sized door on the bottom floor and I glanced in there a few times but only saw pipes and different electrical units and stuff. There was some of the landlord's, maybe past residents' junk in the corner. After a few years I explored behind it and realized it leads to the other half of the house. There was a hidden door behind the wallpaper. Obviously the doorknob was taken off. So it blends in with the wall, in the hallway. We lived in this house for 6 years and I found out about this door 2 years ago. When we opened it we saw a skeleton in the corner. Not gonna lie, that scared me less. Although it was just a prop left by the past owners of our house. Probably to scare the shish out of you when you found it as a joke. Well, they did do a good job. There was a small door under some stairs, almost like Harry Potter's room, in my old apartment in Venezuela. We'd lived there for a year until I leaned on it and felt it wiggle a little and realized it was a small square door. I was too scared to open it, so had my dad do it, and about 20 or so sea croaches flooded out. Never have I felt so much panic. That sounds like it's straight out of my nightmares. My old house had this weirdly large concrete slab in the corner of the yard that was covered by a ton of leaves when we moved in. I thought it was maybe foundation for a shed. But it was in a very odd location. Years later when I was getting ready to move, it bugged me that I didn't know what it was for. I got a friend to help me come dig around it, expecting to confirm that it was just an old foundation. We dug for days in the middle of August. We had to start digging at night to protect ourselves from the heat. We got about 15 feet down and the concrete wasn't showing any signs of ending. We eventually struck a pipe with a nozzle and discovered that there was more concrete moving towards the center of the yard. About a week later my dad came home and almost had a stroke when he saw that we were digging up half the yard. We had sold the house and were expected to leave by September 1st. He made us fill it all in and I left home never finding out what it was. Some of my teachers who were longtime town residents told me that my neighborhood had been farmland before development and that there may have been several bomb or fallout shelters in that area. I would have loved to have found an entrance into the bunker. If that's what it was. I just googled concrete septic tank. And it definitely seems like you were trying to get into an old tank of shish. Well, thanks. Just googled it and realized there was a bunch of these, empty and not hooked up to anything, on a lot behind a grocery store in my hometown that as kids my friends and I played inside. Watched Home Alone and saw that attic that Macaulay Culkin was staying in and wondered if we had one in our townhouse. Ran around with a step ladder until I found it in my mom's closet. Got on my tiptoes on the stepladder and fought the door open, ended up being a big piece of plywood, and peered into the attic. A mouse colony stared back. It was like that scene in Ratatouille. Decades worth of feces covered the whole space. My mom was not happy once I told her. We moved shortly after. A couple of years ago I rented an apartment that was in a massive old architecture-style building. No idea how old it was. I remember when I did the showing they showed me a door that had an elaborate staircase that went straight up to the ceiling and explained that it went to the attic, which was sealed up. When I was finally moving out, curiosity got the best of me and I pushed on the panel at the top of the stairs until it popped open and hoisted myself up there. It was completely dark and the floor was covered in at least an inch of dust. And I found that it was an entire extra floor to my unit. There was some old rotting furniture and magazines littered throughout the rooms. I eventually found a small hole in one of the walls that went into the sealed-off upstairs of the unit next to mine and decided to go through that one too. I found a smaller hole at the back end of that area that led to the next one. I eventually made my way through about 5 or 6 of these sealed-off spaces that had no entrances save these small holes in drywall. The farther I went in, the older the furniture I found. Fridges from the 50s or earlier. Old dishware. And so much dust over everything. The last unit was the most interesting. Hand-painted scenes on the walls and holes to the attic letting sunlight stream in. I took small videos, but they're all on Snapchat, so they're hard to post. I must have been up there for hours just exploring alone in the dark. I was pretty lucky to have the only room with access up there. I lived in the house or my grandma for a few years. Secret room beneath a trapdoor on the second floor, which was basically a void between walls on the complicated first floor. Was used to hide Jewish families during WW2. Not 100% of the answer you expect. But still kinda relevant. My grandpa bought our house back in 1960. It was once owned by Jewish people. We live in a small village in Germany. But the Jewish people got kicked out. Best case scenario, when Hitler did his things. My grandpa renovated the upper part of the house. The roof. You know, the usual things you do with a house that's around 400 years old. He didn't renovate the rooms in the lower floor though, as they were good as us. Many years later, long after he died, around 2010, my sister noticed a broken floorboard in the smaller of the two attics we have. It's between the lower and upper floor and wasn't part of the renovation. She got a flashlight and a mirror and checked. Because we're just curious little FS and love to hunt for treasure. We knew that Jewish people owned it. And we knew the history of them hiding their belongings because the Nazis forced them out. So yeah, we found a ton of cutlery. That weird shish. Pointy spoons. Weird looking teaspoons. Sugar cube grabby grabbers, tongs. Plates. Lots of it. It's all pure silver. And just looks amazing in a weird way. It's nothing special just by looking at it, as they're rather common. But it was still a creepy yet amazing find. Just realizing that some people used those things and had to hide it from the Nazis right at that spot. It's about the story that emerges in your mind. Because this is exactly what happened. Sadly. We kept all of it since then in a showcase. And if someone wants to see pictures, I'll happily post them later on.